Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. Once again, our Twitter account is at Mexico Daily, a very useful Twitter account to follow, especially if you need to know what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. Of course, you can follow on my, well, it's not called Twitter anymore, right? X account, I guess. It's so weird to say it. X account, my personal X account is AM Salazar. That's still very strange for me. That whole Twitter to X change is still somewhat a mystery for many of us. As you know, here on Living in Mexico, we followed very, very closely the whole pandemic crisis that not only Mexico lived, but the coronavirus pandemic crisis that was lived around the world. And as I guess we're more than it's been 3 years since the crisis started. It's a very good time. More than 3 years and a half, almost 3 years and a half. It's a good time to evaluate what was done what was done right and what was mistake, and what are the opportunities to improve. And the reason to continue talking about this is because, as many of you have, if you've been following a couple of my shows, we're talking about a new coronavirus strain that has come to different parts of the world. Clearly, it's in the United States. To talk about Brazil. And of course, everyone is expecting a new coronavirus, not as dangerous as it was 3 years ago, but still we continue to talk about COVID-19. So it's a good time to sit down and just review what happened in Mexico and what happened around the world. There was a important article that was published in Lancet, which is a scientific publication. It's a weekly publication where with a very detailed analysis of Mexico's efforts and policies to control COVID-19. To talk about this article, which is it's somewhat controversial here in Mexico, as you can imagine. Joining us is Salomón Chertorivski. You know him well. He's been joining me throughout the years from different positions. I remember interviewing you, Salomón, when you were Secretary of Health for Mexico many years ago. Now you are a congressman, and I know you read the article. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about Lancet. It's a medium. It's a weekly publication that has enormous credibility in the scientific world. Correct?
Yes, Ana Maria. Probably, and with the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet is the most important health publication in the world. And it has been out there for 200 years, publishing every week. And not only that, and I think the most important part is that every piece that is published at Lancet is peer review. That is, you cannot publish whatever you want, whatever you think, an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You have to publish evidence-based, data-based papers. Everything that is published at the Lancet is scientific, proven, and it has a very difficult path in order to let into a publication. I mean,
now just tell us a little bit about the authors. This was published, I believe, this week, and yes. Just tell us about the authors, and then we'll start talking about the content of this review.
We have the main author is Felicia Noll. She's a PhD in economics. She has always specialized in public health. She's very into worldwide efforts. As a worldwide efforts to cancer care and control. She's part of a lot of Lancet committees, and she heads today the Institute of the Americas at University of Miami. There are a bunch of other authors, a couple of Mexicans. For example, Pablo Curi, who was for 8 years the Undersecretary of Health
Oh, I know. He's been on the show numerous times. He's very smart. He's very knowledgeable.
Yes, he's probably the most important practitioner in epidemiology of this country. I mean, he has been on the streets, on the rural communities. No, he knows how to work through a pandemic. He's really a worldwide star. And the senior author of this article is Julio Frenk, who you well know, and most
I've interviewed him numerous times. Yeah.
Julio Frenk is former Secretary of Health in Mexico. He envisioned and he designed the so-called Seguro Popular, which is the main subject of interest in this particular Lancet piece. It's what it is evaluate and what happened through these years without the Seguro Popular and with the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
He is, let me tell you, because it's very interesting. Julio Frenk is the only Hispanic speaking person that had a professional school at Harvard University. He was the head of the School of Public Health at Harvard University. Again, the first Spanish speaking, the first Hispanic to head a professional school at Harvard. And today, he's the president of the University of Miami. Probably Ana Maria, and I don't really have all the history, but probably the only Mexican who has chaired an important university in the States.
Right.
And he's a remarkable guy, no?
So
among many others.
Now, why don't you start just kind of like in bullet form, just kind of give us in general what the article says, and then we can talk about some of the controversies. So in general, what's the conclusion of how Mexico handled the COVID-19?
I mean, the history of health, of the health system in Mexico over the last 40 years have a lot of very interesting points. Probably the most important over the last 2 decades was in 2003.
Right.
A reform of the Health Act in which the Seguro Popular was enhanced. It was designed. There was a new model for financing health for all the people, which it was half of the Mexican population that did not have a social security because of the laboral status. Before the Seguro Popular, all that population received attendance, but they did not have an insurance, a financial mechanism to ensure their health assistance, their health services. In 2003, that started 20 years ago, which is very interesting. And that was the starting point for the search of universal health coverage for Mexico. Lancet, this journal, has published papers in 2003 describing the design and the first pilot project of the Seguro Popular. In 2006, in which you have the first results of the model, they published a huge series of 6 documents. In 2012, we published, and I say we because I was an author on that publication, of what had happened with the Seguro Popular after 9 years. And this new paper is a review of what happened with Seguro Popular from 2012 to 2020 and on the beginning of the pandemic, when the Seguro Popular was already destroyed or was not in existence anymore, and the INSABI was created. So the paper tries to evaluate what Seguro Popular reached. It gives a lot of numbers, a lot of evidence, because, Ana Maria, there are more than 300 published papers in peer-reviewed journals about the Seguro Popular. So this paper tried to acknowledge what happened with Seguro Popular over the years, particularly first, what happened between 2012 and 2018. And then after this new administration decided to establishing a new system without any evidence-based decision-making for the policy that they were setting up. So probably if I have to put one bullet point on what this article talks about and why it's important on a worldwide publication, is what happens when you have a system that is working, that has a lot of evidence of what is working on that system, what needs to be changed, what reforms need to be done. And when you decide to finish one policy and start another without any evidence based for what you are setting up, and what happened on the results. And what happened is tragic. And what this paper shows is that even before COVID, because in 2019, they were already dismantling the Seguro Popular. In 2020, the first 4 months before we have cases of pandemic in Mexico, we did not have Seguro Popular. And we started a pandemic when we were trying to invent another system for half of the Mexican population. What are the most important results? And those are terrific, Ana Maria.
You know, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, because the COVID was so dangerous and it happened relatively fast. There was no vaccines. I mean, there was many, and you know, you watch what happened in the United States, in countries that did have resources or should have known better, and it was catastrophic. And millions of people died. I guess the question is, even though maybe if they had kept some parts of the system working, of the Seguro Popular, would it have made any big difference, considering what happened during those 2 years, where simply the system collapsed, not only in Mexico but around the world?
Well, but the numbers in Mexico
were outrageous.
The system that we have are out of order. I mean, 800,000 excess death in Mexico. It's just catastrophic. We were the country in the world in which more people from the public, from the health sector died. I mean, what happened in Mexico was there, and it was not only the Seguro Popular. This paper tried to explain what happens when you change a whole system and
in the middle of a crisis.
You have political polarization. You have a lot of discussion in a populist world, and you have a pandemic. I mean, it's one of the variables. But when you analyze how Mexican health system managed the pandemic, there are a lot of things that we have to talk about it. And those were additional, very bad, terrible, I would say, decisions that cause the problem. Probably if I have to, I'm not talking about the paper, I'm talking just about the pandemic, and Maria, if you allowed me. I mean, what happened in the pandemic, and as you were describing, at the beginning, there were many things that we did not know.
Right.
So you had to be flexible. You have to learn from what was happening. You have to see the evidence. You have to be able to see the best practices that were taking place on other places that started before. The problem with Mexico is like, I don't know if you use Waze when you're driving or you use Google Maps or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, you put the place that you're going, you put your direction, and it says it's gonna take you that long, and the route that I suggest is this one. Right. But when you are in your car, a couple of minutes after leaving house, there's more intelligence, there's more evidence, and there's a recalculation of the suggested route and the time that it's going to take you. Well, you take the new route that the Google Maps or Waze suggests you. In Mexico, probably the most important problem that we had is that when we already had new evidence, new intelligence of what was happening, we did not change the route.
Right.
Let me put you probably two examples, Ana Maria. One, we knew very early at the pandemic that we need to do a lot more testings. Test. You remember?
Right, I remember that, yeah.
Why? Because 70% of all people that get infected did not have symptoms. So they were out there and they were contagious, and we didn't know. So we need to be very aggressive on the testing. In Mexico, the authorities always stayed with the model in which no testing was needed, only when you have symptoms. Another example was using a mask, Ana Maria.
Yeah.
It was in May of 2020, in May, in which our Nobel Prize, Mario Molina, rest in peace, he came to Mexico and he told us that transmission of the virus is different as we were thinking. It is not the big droplets that we put when we talk and when we sing and when it is on the air. It's the aerosol. So
right, I remember that.
The most important piece in order to stop transmission is using a mask. It was, again, May 2020. And until now, our authorities do not recommend
using masks.
Or forced to use a mask. No?
Right.
So the pandemic was a bunch of other things. Among what happened, it was that we were changing our health system, or we were trying to change it because it was a failure, as we know.
Well, it's I ran out of time, boy, and there's so many other questions I have, especially since we are now starting to see this whole electoral process heating up. And of course, candidates from the opposition are clearly going to be using the pandemic and the strategy that the Mexican government used in the pandemic as one of the probably most important arguments against this government. So promise me you'll come back and we'll continue analyzing not only this article, but what should be Mexico's new policies, health policies. And I'm sure you have a lot of ideas and suggestions for that. So hopefully you'll come back soon. Thank you so much, Salomón Chertorivski, former Secretary of Health and Congressman. It's always great to have you on the show.
It's fantastic, Ana Maria, and I'm always very happy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that went fast. We've got to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Please don't go away. I'll be right back.
Pues perdón el desorden y creo y perdón, no quería contradecirte, pero sí el paper es de otra cosa.
Sí, no, pero está bien, pero sí llegaste al punto, no